What happens when an undercover CEO steps onto the warehouse floor and witnesses his own employees being mistreated? Elliot Grayson built a successful company, but when complaints about toxic leadership started piling up, he decided to see the truth for himself. Disguised as a regular worker, he uncovered a culture of fear, intimidation, and abuse, until he finally stepped in to put an end to it. This is the story of how one CEO exposed corruption, took back control, and rebuilt trust from the ground up. Stay tuned to see how it all unfolded. Elliot Grayson had built his logistics company from the ground up, turning a small regional operation into a thriving national supply chain. With multiple fulfillment centers across the country, the company was known for its fast deliveries and competitive efficiency. However, despite its success on paper, a troubling pattern had begun to emerge. Complaints from warehouse employees were piling up: low morale, excessive turnover, and reports of toxic leadership. Productivity was declining, and customer orders were facing unusual delays. But when Elliot questioned his middle management team, their responses were frustratingly vague. They blamed the workers, calling them lazy, unmotivated, and poor hires. Yet, the numbers didn't add up. Employees weren't just quitting at one or two locations. This was happening across multiple sites. If bad hires were the real issue, why were so many experienced workers walking away? Elliot had spent years cultivating a company culture based on fairness and efficiency, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost sight of what was really happening on the ground floor. As CEO, he had become buried in board meetings, financial forecasts, and strategic planning, far removed from the day-to-day realities of his workforce. He trusted his management team to handle operations, but trust without verification was a mistake. If there was something truly wrong at the warehouse level, he needed to see it for himself, and so Elliot made a bold decision. He would go undercover. With the help of a professional disguise expert, Elliot transformed into Sam Porter, an aging warehouse worker with a slight limp, glasses, and a worn-out uniform. No one would recognize him. Most of the warehouse staff had never even seen the CEO in person. His plan was simple: blend in, work alongside his employees, and uncover the truth. He chose one of his largest and busiest distribution centers, a facility that had the highest employee turnover rate. If there was corruption, abuse, or inefficiency, this was the place to find it. On Monday morning, Sam Porter arrived for his first shift, clipboard in hand, ready to see what his own company had become. Dressed in a faded uniform and steel-toe boots, Elliot Grayson, now Sam Porter, walked through the automatic doors of the massive distribution center. The air inside was thick with the scent of cardboard, machinery oil, and sweat. Forklifts zipped past, conveyor belts hummed with endless packages, and rows of towering shelves stretched as far as the eye could see. It was a world far removed from boardrooms and strategy meetings. Yet this was the very foundation of his company's success. He approached the front desk, where a tired-looking woman named Karen, the warehouse's scheduling supervisor, barely spared him a glance as she shoved a clipboard into his hands. "New hire?" she asked, already looking away. "Yeah," Elliot answered, keeping his voice gruff. Karen sighed. "Follow the signs to the loading dock. You'll be working under Marcus, the shift supervisor. Just do what he says, don't slow down, and you'll get through your shift. No introductions, no onboarding, no safety briefing, just get to work." Elliot made his way toward the warehouse floor, already getting a sense of why employees felt undervalued and overworked. As he stepped onto the floor, the sheer scale and intensity of the operation struck him. Workers moved at a breakneck pace, lifting heavy boxes, scanning items, and pushing massive carts through narrow aisles. It didn't take long to spot Marcus, the shift supervisor. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, with a permanent scowl and a booming voice that cut through the warehouse noise. Within minutes, Elliot watched him bark orders at employees like a drill sergeant, showing no patience for mistakes or delays. Elliot kept his head down, blending into the sea of workers as Marcus finally turned his sharp gaze toward him. "You're new. That means you're slow. Keep up or I'll make sure you don't come back tomorrow," Marcus growled. Elliot simply nodded, pushing down the urge to challenge him immediately. He had one goal: observe and understand before taking action. He grabbed a cart and started stacking packages, his muscles already aching from the unfamiliar labor. Within the first hour, he felt the weight of the relentless workload. The pace was unforgiving, and the exhaustion on his coworkers' faces told him everything he needed to know. As he worked, he could hear muffled grumbling from employees nearby. The frustration, fear, and exhaustion in their voices were unmistakable. Elliot clenched his jaw. He had expected problems, but he hadn't anticipated the severity of what he was about to uncover. Elliot Grayson, now disguised as Sam Porter, stepped into the distribution center. Immediately hit by the overwhelming sounds of machinery, conveyor belts whirring, forklifts beeping, and voices shouting orders over the noise. The air was thick with the smell of cardboard, dust, and sweat, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled offices he was used to. It was one thing to review operational reports, but standing here among the workers, it became painfully clear how demanding this job really was. The sheer scale of the warehouse was intimidating, with endless rows of stacked pallets and boxes moving at a relentless pace. This wasn't just a workplace, it was a machine. And the workers were merely cogs, expected to keep it running, no matter the cost. Elliot approached the check-in desk, where Karen, the overworked scheduling supervisor, barely looked up from her tablet. Without so much as a proper greeting, she shoved a clipboard into his hands. "New guy?" she asked, flipping through a stack of schedules. "Yeah," Elliot replied, keeping his voice rough and neutral. "Marcus is your shift lead. Follow his orders. Don't slow down." She motioned vaguely toward the far end of the warehouse before turning her attention elsewhere. No introductions, no safety briefing, just get to work. That alone told him plenty about how this place was run. If this was how new hires were welcomed, no wonder turnover was high. Elliot followed the signs toward the loading docks, where workers moved with machine-like efficiency, their faces set in exhaustion. It didn't take long to spot Marcus, the shift supervisor. A tall, burly man with a shaved head and a permanent scowl, Marcus had the air of someone who enjoyed power a little too much. "You new?" Marcus barked the moment Elliot approached. Elliot nodded. Marcus scoffed. "Figures, try not to screw up. If you can't keep up, don't expect to last long." Elliot resisted the urge to respond. He wasn't here to argue, he was here to observe. He grabbed a cart and started stacking packages, his muscles straining almost immediately under the unfamiliar workload. Within an hour, he could feel the fatigue creeping in. It was clear the workers weren't just overloaded, they were completely burned out. As Elliot pushed forward, he overheard murmurs from nearby employees. Frustrated whispers, complaints quickly stifled whenever Marcus was near. Fear hung in the air like a thick fog. Something was very wrong here, and Elliot was determined to find out exactly what. It didn't take long for Elliot, now Sam Porter, to see the cracks in the system. As he pushed through his second hour on the warehouse floor, the relentless pace and unspoken fear among the workers became glaringly obvious. Employees kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact with supervisors, their movements almost mechanical. There was no camaraderie, no conversation beyond brief, hushed exchanges, as if speaking too much might get them in trouble. Elliot had expected tough working conditions, but what unsettled him was the absolute lack of morale. These weren't just overworked employees. They were people operating under constant fear. The source of that fear became abundantly clear when Marcus's voice thundered across the floor. "Are you stupid or just useless?" Elliot turned in time to see Marcus towering over a young worker, barely in his 20s, whose hands trembled as he clutched a fallen package. The young man's name tag read Jordan. He stammered, I just needed a second to get a better grip." Marcus snatched the clipboard from Jordan's hands and smacked it against a metal table, the sharp crack making several workers flinch. "A second? A second is the difference between us making money or losing it. You want to drag the rest of the team down because you can't handle a simple task?" Jordan swallowed hard and nodded, eyes downcast. Elliot's fists clenched. He had seen bad management before, but this was outright abuse. Marcus wasn't just a demanding supervisor, he was a bully who thrived on intimidation. And what was worse, no one was stepping in. Elliot took a breath and forced himself to stay in character. If he wanted to fix this, he needed to see just how deep the dysfunction went. As the shift dragged on, the signs of mismanagement and negligence became impossible to ignore. The warehouse was understaffed, yet the workers were expected to hit unrealistic quotas. Equipment malfunctioned regularly, slowing workers down, yet instead of fixing the issues, Marcus blamed employees for being too slow. At one point, a conveyor belt jammed, causing a critical delay. Instead of following proper safety protocol, Marcus forced a worker to clear the jam manually while the belt was still running. Elliot watched in disbelief, realizing it was only a matter of time before a serious accident happened. During his first break, Elliot sat alone at the edge of the dimly lit break room, listening to the hushed conversations around him. "If Marcus yells at me one more time, I swear I'm quitting," one worker muttered. "Yeah, well, good luck finding something better," another said. They cut Carlos's hours last month after he complained about safety. Elliot's stomach tightened. Retaliation. That explained the silence. No one reported Marcus because they were afraid. Elliot glanced at Jordan, who sat alone, picking at his food but barely eating. His shoulders were hunched, his face pale with exhaustion. This wasn't just a bad workplace. This was a toxic environment designed to keep people powerless. And Elliot wasn't going to let it continue. Elliot, still playing the role of Sam Porter, used his lunch break to do what he did best: listen. He knew that the real truth wouldn't come from management reports or performance metrics. It would come from the people who lived this reality every day. Instead of sitting alone, he made his way toward Jordan, the young worker who had been berated by Marcus earlier. Jordan stiffened as Elliot sat across from him, his posture tense, as if expecting another round of criticism. "Rough day?" Elliot asked casually, taking a bite of the stale vending machine sandwich in front of him. Jordan hesitated, glancing around as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "Yeah, but that's just how it is here." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "Marcus always likes that?" Jordan let out a humorless chuckle. "Worse, actually. He pushes people until they break. You keep up or you're out. No warnings, no second chances." That was exactly what Elliot feared. Toxic leadership wasn't just about yelling, it was about control. By keeping workers terrified, Marcus ensured no one ever questioned him. Other workers nearby, emboldened by the conversation, started chiming in. "They cut Carlos's hours last month after he complained," one worker muttered. "I saw Marcus force someone to fix a jammed conveyor belt last week while it was still running," another added. Elliot hid his anger, nodding as if he were just another frustrated employee. "No one's ever reported him?" Jordan snorted. "To who? Corporations don't care. As long as the shipments go out, nothing changes." That sentence hit Elliot harder than he expected. They had lost faith in leadership, and, if he were being honest, he was to blame. He had trusted the regional managers to keep things in check, but they had fed him lies while his workers suffered. Elliot set his sandwich down, appetite gone. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was abuse. And now that he had seen it firsthand, he wasn't going to let it continue. As the break ended and the workers trudged back onto the floor, Elliot had already made up his mind. He needed to see more, to push Marcus to his limit. He had to witness the breaking point before he revealed the truth. And if Marcus crossed the line again, Elliot would be ready. The tension had been building all day, and Elliot could feel it in the air. The unrelenting workload, the exhaustion in the workers' eyes, and the quiet resentment simmering beneath the surface. It was all leading to something inevitable. He had seen enough to confirm the toxic culture, but he needed to see just how far Marcus would go before stepping in. That moment came just before the end of the shift. Jordan, already worn out and running on fumes, was carrying a large, heavy box toward a shipping pallet when his grip slipped. The package hit the floor with a loud thud, causing nearby workers to freeze mid-task. For a second, there was only silence. Then, like clockwork, Marcus's thunderous voice cut through the warehouse. "Are you kidding me?" he roared, storming over. Jordan scrambled to lift the box, his hands shaking. I'm sorry, it just—" "I don't want to hear it." Marcus grabbed Jordan by the collar, shoving him back a step. "You think sorry fixes this? That box was supposed to be on a truck 10 minutes ago. You think you can just screw around while the rest of us pick up your slack?" Elliot moved before he could think. "Hey!" His voice came out sharp and commanding. The warehouse fell silent, all movement grinding to a halt. Marcus whipped around, eyes narrowing. "Who the hell are you?" "To a guy who knows that laying hands on an employee is crossing the line." For the first time since Elliot had stepped foot in this warehouse, Marcus looked truly caught off guard. He sized up Elliot, clearly not recognizing him, but Elliot didn't give him the chance to recover. "You think this is leadership? Screaming at people, pushing them around? That's not running a warehouse, it's running people into the ground." Marcus let out a scoff, masking his unease with bravado. "I don't have time for this. You're done here. Get off my floor." Elliot took a deep breath, then removed his glasses, shaking off the slight limp in his step. "No, you're done here." A hush fell over the warehouse. Workers exchanged stunned glances, realization dawning in their faces. Marcus's expression shifted from anger to confusion, then recognition, then panic. Elliot locked eyes with him. "I'm Elliot Grayson. I own this company, and I've spent the past 12 hours watching you intimidate, belittle, and push employees past their breaking point." Marcus's mouth opened and closed, searching for an escape, but there wasn't one. "You're fired." The words hung in the air, met with nothing but silence, and for the first time since arriving, Elliot saw something shift in the workers' faces. Not fear. No. Marcus stood frozen, his face drained of color, as Elliot's words settled over the warehouse floor. For the first time, he wasn't the one holding power, and he knew it. Workers exchanged stunned glances, barely daring to breathe, as they waited to see what would happen next. You can't just fire me," Marcus sputtered, his voice no longer carrying the same authority. "I was just—" Elliot's voice cut through him like a blade. "I can, and I just did. Security will escort you out." He turned to a nearby supervisor. "Make the call." Marcus looked around for support, but none of the workers spoke up for him. The realization hit him hard. He had ruled with fear, and now fear wasn't enough to save him. As security arrived and led him away, Elliot turned his attention to Karen, the exhausted scheduling supervisor who had barely acknowledged him earlier that morning. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, his tone firm but controlled. Karen hesitated, then exhaled, rubbing her temples. "A while. Years, probably. And no one reported it?" Her mouth tightened. "People were scared. And honestly, we didn't think the corporation would care." That hit Elliot deeper than he expected. They had lost faith in leadership, his leadership. He had trusted numbers and reports over the people actually working here. That mistake ended today. "Well, I care," Elliot said, "and things change starting now." The workers were still watching, their faces a mix of shock and cautious optimism. He knew words wouldn't be enough to fix the damage done. Trust had to be rebuilt, and actions would speak louder than promises. Turning to the assembled employees, he made his first order of business clear. No more intimidation, no more fear. This warehouse, this company, should be a place where people want to work, not one they dread coming to. The silence stretched for a moment before someone muttered, "I'll believe it when I see it." Elliot didn't blame them for their skepticism, but he intended to prove them wrong. He turned back to Karen. "We need a new warehouse manager. Someone who knows this place inside and out. Someone who's actually here, not sitting in an office miles away." Karen blinked in surprise as Elliot's meaning sank in. "Me? You've been surviving under bad leadership, not enforcing it," Elliot said. "I need someone who's willing to help me fix this." For the first time all day, Karen straightened her posture. "If you actually mean that," she said, "I'll do it." Elliot nodded. "I mean it." And with that, the first real step toward change began. Elliot knew that firing Marcus was just the beginning. Fixing a broken workplace required more than just removing one bad leader. It meant rebuilding trust, changing policies, and proving to employees that things would truly improve. The very next day, he held a meeting right on the warehouse floor, not in a closed office. He didn't bring in a corporate HR rep or a team of executives. He wanted to speak directly to the workers. "I need to hear from you," Elliot told them. "Not through reports, not through management summaries. From you. What do you need to make this job better?" At first, there was hesitation. Employees had spent years believing that their voices didn't matter, that speaking up only led to retaliation. But slowly, people started talking. Real concerns poured out. "We're drowning in work because there aren't enough of us. Half our scanners don't work, and we get blamed when we're too slow. New hires get thrown in with no real training, then we get punished when they mess up." Elliot took notes, listened carefully, and most importantly, he acted. Within the week, he approved an increase in hiring to fill the gaps left by high turnover. New equipment was ordered, replacing outdated tools that slowed productivity. Safety protocols were enforced, ensuring that no worker would ever be put in a dangerous position just to meet quotas. But the biggest change came in how employees could report problems. Elliot implemented an anonymous reporting system that bypassed local managers entirely and went straight to corporate. No more fear of retaliation, he told them. If something is wrong, we'll know about it and we'll fix it. Not everyone was convinced. Years of bad leadership had left scars. Even Jordan, the young worker who had suffered Marcus's abuse, remained skeptical. "I've seen people talk big before," he admitted to Elliot. "Then things go right back to how they were." Elliot handed him a card, his direct line: "If that happens, you call me. Hold me accountable." Jordan studied the card for a long moment. Then, for the first time, he nodded. The warehouse wasn't fixed overnight, but a shift had begun. The fear was slowly fading, replaced with something stronger: hope. A few months later, Elliot returned to the warehouse, this time not in disguise, but as himself. As he walked the floor, he could feel the difference. The energy had shifted. Workers weren't just rushing to meet impossible quotas, they were collaborating, communicating, and moving with purpose. There was still the usual hustle, but it was no longer driven by fear of punishment. Instead, it was about efficiency, teamwork, and respect. Jordan, the once nervous worker, was now more confident, no longer flinching at every sudden noise. Karen, now the warehouse manager, was actively engaging with employees, addressing issues before they escalated. Productivity had actually improved, not because people were scared, but because they were supported. As Elliot passed by the loading docks, he saw a worker arrive late, an incident that once would have led to yelling or worse. Instead, Karen pulled the worker aside, speaking to him in a calm, professional manner. The worker nodded, clearly relieved. When Karen saw Elliot watching, she smirked. "You keep showing up like this, people are going to think you actually work here." Elliot chuckled. Maybe I should." She raised an eyebrow. "Don't joke, I might actually put you on a shift." Elliot pretended to consider, "as long as I don't have to deal with the scanners." Karen laughed, but then her expression turned serious. "It's better now," she admitted. "People actually feel like they matter." That was all Elliot needed to hear. He had learned a valuable lesson. A company is only as strong as the people working at its foundation. Leadership wasn't just about profits and performance metrics. It was about trust, accountability, and creating an environment where employees could thrive. As he left the warehouse, he knew the work wasn't over. Change wasn't a one-time event, it was a commitment. But as long as he stayed involved, listening and holding leadership accountable, his company would never fall into neglect again. And for the first time in a long while, Elliot was proud of the workplace he had built. The story of Elliot Grayson's undercover experience highlights a fundamental truth. Leadership isn't just about numbers and performance metrics, it's about people. For too long, Elliot had trusted management reports and corporate summaries, assuming they reflected reality. But true leadership requires first-hand involvement, not just delegating authority. By stepping onto the warehouse floor, he witnessed the fear, burnout, and mistreatment his employees endured, something that paperwork never revealed. A key lesson here is that a company thrives when its workers feel valued, respected, and safe. Toxic leadership, like Marcus's, creates an environment of fear, silence, and high turnover, ultimately harming productivity. The moment Elliot replaced fear with trust and accountability, the workplace transformed. Employees became more engaged, more productive, and less afraid to speak up. Another critical takeaway is that change doesn't happen overnight. Workers had been mistreated for so long that skepticism was natural. Trust has to be earned, not demanded. By making meaningful changes, hiring more staff, improving conditions, and creating a safe way to report problems, Elliot rebuilt trust, not just policies. The biggest lesson? Leadership is about action. A great leader listens, learns, and most importantly, acts.